The quality of your boundaries and the way that you express them in relationships will quite literally make or break your relationships. Without them, you'll find yourself getting walked all over or losing yourself in the presence of other people. And if they're too firm or if they're aggressively held, you'll find yourself creating conflict, pushing people away, or struggling to authentically connect and create intimacy, trust, and safety. So, what are boundaries exactly? Why do they create so much tension and confusion in relationships? And perhaps most importantly, how can we start to express them skillfully and become masterful in the way that we articulate our boundaries? By the end of this episode, you will have a deeper understanding of boundaries than most people. And I'll also be offering you a step-by-step system so you can actually start to practice this and take the theory and actually action it in your own life and in your relationships. If you're new here, welcome to Awakened Evolution. My name is Jasper Brown. This is actually a really deep topic. The concept of boundaries goes far beyond relationships themselves. This is not just a nice to have. This is actually a foundational concept that takes us all the way into the terrain of sovereignty, the construction of yourself, your identity, and of course into spirituality. So I'll be weaving those concepts in, especially towards the end of this episode. I'll give you the meta perspective as I conceive of it on boundaries. But first, let's start with the basics. So what are boundaries? Boundaries are lines, delineations, or distinctions that we create with our minds in order to determine where one thing begins and another one ends. So if you're looking, look at your visual field right now. You can see the room that you're in. Maybe you're in the car. Maybe you're walking outside. And just look at the way that your mind constructs surfaces. There's maybe the box of the room that you're in or the shell of the car. Our minds are constantly constructing what we think of as limits to one thing where a certain thing ends and another thing begins. In the context of relationships, there's you and there's me. Where do I end and you begin? Now, our mind likes to think that that's a very obvious thing. We like to construct our sense of self and say, okay, this is where I end and that's where you start. But when we look more closely, those lines are quite fuzzy and blurry. Take you and your family, for example. Where do you begin and where do they end? It's not so obvious. You have these kind of nebulous relationships with people. Okay, there's the end of your physical body. Maybe you say, okay, my hands, the tips of my fingers is where I end. But what about the relationship itself? If you're living with someone, or you have people living in your house, where does your space begin? Where does their space begin? The space is shared. How do we navigate that? Or what about you with your romantic partner? What stuff do you consider yours and what stuff do you consider theirs? Where's the line? It's not, these lines get fuzzy really quick. Especially when we're cohabiting space, sharing space with other people. The way that we identify with ourselves and our surrounding and the things in our surrounding quickly becomes very, very open to interpretation. what you might consider something that belongs to you. Another person could lay claim to that and say, hey, I paid money um, to help you buy that, or that's something we bought together. Wasn't it supposed to be both of us? And we can easily argue over trivial things or perhaps very large things when it comes to how do we actually organize our lives together with people. What about where our feelings are concerned? What about where our emotional needs are concerned? We are very complex creatures, just unfathomably complex. From the biology to the psychology to the sociological factors that imprint and kind of condition our lives in various different ways, we are unbelievably complex. And that's why human relationships are so goddamn hard. There's so much nuance, so much depth. How deep do you want to go? And that's why boundaries are really such a powerful practice and concept to really bake into your understanding of yourself and also the way that we approach relationships, because the boundaries that we have, we literally create and maintain those boundaries in order to regulate how we interact with other people. What are we open to, or what are we closed to? What feels good, what doesn't feel good? What is safe, what doesn't make us feel safe? How do we communicate those in a way that doesn't alienate the other people or push them away from us, but actually invites them into deeper, healthier relationship? It's not so simple, especially when those boundaries are pushing people's buttons. Maybe you want something that the other person doesn't want, or they want you to do something that you're not comfortable with. And so we need to be able to navigate this. We need to be able to negotiate this and articulate our needs and our boundaries in a healthy way. And so the boundary, as I sort of conceive of it, is one of the core conditions of how we manage our needs as an organism. How do you get what you need and ensure that your needs are getting met in a way that's also harmonious with what other people need? So think of a boundary like the membrane of a cell. A cell lets substances in and out, so it's semi-permeable. It's not a rigid, hard, impenetrable. It's it's not a shell like a nut that doesn't let water or anything in. It's rigid. It's very hard. Boundaries are not that hard. They're more fluid. They let substances in, and they also modulate what comes out. I mean, I'm sure we could look at a nut and say that is also a boundary. Maybe it lets certain vapor or air molecules coming in and out. There's probably an exchange of information and substances there as well. So a boundary also offers protection. It stops harmful things entering into the cell, and it also offers containment for the thing that's protected within the cell or within the nut. It allows the fruit or the whatever's inside to grow and to be protected from anything that would contaminate it. So we can start to think of our own boundaries as this semi-permeable membrane. In the case of a human, it's letting things, it's protecting us from letting things in that might be harmful for us. And it's also stopping things coming out. So a boundary might prevent us from taking on, someone's bad energy, or if someone's being aggressive or abusive. Our boundaries are what protects us from taking on too much of that which is not healthy for us. In terms of containment, a boundary also might prevent us from spewing our inner process or our unfiltered emotions out into the world in a way that might be harmful for the people that we care about. I'm not just going to vomit everything that I think that pops into my head, into my relationship, because that could be really harmful. And, the people that I care about might not really appreciate that, might not make them feel safe. So my boundaries are also protecting those outside of myself and protecting myself and my needs at the same time. So here's a couple of examples, common examples that come up in relationships, simple kind of boundary examples. For example, my time is valuable. I need my time to be respected because my time is one of the most valuable resources that I have. So if we agree to meet at your house at a specific time and I rock up and you're not there, you're late, we've agreed to that time, and you're not there, that might cross a boundary for me because I want to feel like my time is being respected and the agreements that we make are also being honored so that I can trust you, so that I can trust your word, so that I can have faith that you're going to be where you say you're going to be at the time that you say you're going to be there. And if you dishonor that repeatedly, I'm not going to trust you anymore. You're going to say, hey, let's meet at 3. And I'm like, you're always late. And I might have to say something about that. Another common example is I need to feel safe and respected. So if you insult me or threaten me or, make me feel unsafe physically, emotionally, energetically, that's going to cross a boundary for me. I don't want to be around people who make me feel consistently unsafe. Just not going to happen. I value my own safety and the regulation of my nervous system and my mental health and well-being too much to tolerate people who would consistently make me feel unsafe. And I had to learn that the hard way. I'll tell more stories about that later. Another example is I need time and space to myself. I really value solitude and time for me to think and create and to meditate and practice. So if you keep barging into my space without knocking on my door and, interrupting whatever it is that I'm doing, that will cross a boundary for me. I really value that time and space to myself. And if you dishonor that and disrespect that, we're going to have a problem. I'm going to have to say something. Now, for some of you, this might already be a bit of a revelation. Why? Because many of us grow up without ever learning that it's even okay to ask for this kind of thing, for us to even be able to advocate for our basic needs to be met. And this is what we would call enmeshment, where your boundaries are overly permeable. They're weak. If we take the cell analogy, it's very flimsy and anything can basically penetrate into that cell. In the context of relationships, we tend to collapse our sense of self and we abandon our needs in order to do whatever it is that other people want us to do. So we have a weak boundary system and we usually get walked all over. Other people boss us around. We have a low sense of self-worth and autonomy because other people's needs tend to be higher than ours. Or we have a consistent pattern of going with the flow or abandoning our position in order to just make sure that other people are happy and they don't dislike us. So the boundary gets crossed. We tend to collapse our position and we start to fawn or freeze. A fawn response might be overly apologizing and saying, oh, I'm sorry, please, okay, whatever I can do to help, oh, my bad, please don't abandon me. Please just like me. I'll make it up to you, this kind of stuff. Freeze response here from a nervous system perspective would be your boundary gets crossed, and then you like basically just stop, like you clam up. You don't know what to say. You feel uncomfortable, but you're not sure how to express that. It becomes difficult to articulate what it is that you need. You just might be numb. Or maybe your strategy is to flee. It's a flight response. Your boundary gets crossed and you run away. Weak boundaries are often a sign that your caregivers never helped you to identify or advocate for your needs. It was definitely the case with me. I had to go through a process of experiencing enough pain because I was a people pleaser and I abandoned my needs and I just let people walk all over me, especially in relationships. I had a pattern of attracting strong women who would be crazy and very sort of dominant. And I struggled to stand up to that power because I didn't have the connection to my boundary system to be able to say, hey, that's actually not okay for me. I'm not comfortable with you talking to me like that. I feel disrespected. I feel unsafe because your emotions are explosive and chaotic and you don't take responsibility for them or the impact that they have on this relationship, for example. That's something I had to learn later. Only by experiencing enough of that pain did I wake up and say, actually, I have piss weak boundaries and I never stand up for myself. I had to grow a spine. Or perhaps you heard those examples that I just gave you and you thought, yeah, I always ask for what I need and I take it when necessary. I don't have a problem with that stuff. I'm very assertive when it comes to my boundaries. Maybe that assertiveness goes too far and you became what we might call walled off. Or you're on the aggressive end of the spectrum. Someone crosses your boundaries and your knee-jerk reaction is to enter a fight response. Overly rigid boundaries that you tend to force aggressively, even if it costs you connection. Maybe it even costs you relationships and you push people away. You have a habit or a pattern of breaking relationships because your boundaries are too aggressively held or too rigid. Perhaps if that's your pattern, then you've grown up with a severe lack of safety and had to physically and energetically defend yourself and fight to get your needs met. So your pattern here is when the boundary gets crossed, there's an intense sympathetic activation of your nervous system. The fight response get triggered and you start, prepping for battle. You're ready to throw down. And often that can be like a very quick, like the fuse is very short. And so the work there is a different, is learning to contain what comes out. Whereas in the enmeshed situation, the work is learning to have better protection, to actually defend yourself better, to stand up for yourself. So it's interesting to see that our boundary system can be dysfunctional in multiple different directions. They can be overly permeable, they can be too rigid, we can be what we call walled off. When it comes to the men that I work with in coaching and in my men's groups, one of the key sort of characteristics that I notice over the years of working with hundreds and hundreds of guys is this chronic disconnection from feeling. We often don't know what we feel, or we tend to intellectualize our feelings. Men have a habit of treating feelings like a problem to be solved rather than something to actually be felt And as I've talked about many times on this podcast, feelings are information. They're feedback from a biological system that is communicating to us in ways other than language. And so those feelings are actually really important data. They give us really, really crucial information that we need, which is connected to our needs. So, for example, you might feel hungry. We could use this as more of an instinctual thing, but hunger is going to drive you towards eating. You don't have to think, oh, I'm hungry now, I need to go and get some food. It's an automatic response. In just the same way, your anger, if you don't have a healthy or conscious relationship to your anger, you're going to struggle to enforce your need for safety and respect. Because it's the fight response, it's the anger that makes you get bigger, that makes you sort of get ready to oppose the thing that is encroaching upon your safety and your sense of self-respect or your dignity. And so if you're disconnected from your anger, which many, many, many men are, because our culture has conditioned men out of being angry because there's a strong negative association with angry man, bad man. So a lot of men tend to be passive, overly passive, people pleasers, nice guys who let people walk all over them. It was definitely the case for me. And that erodes, that lack of anger, the disconnection from our fight response, means that we have very weak boundaries because we have nothing to back them up. You might feel that your boundary gets transgressed, but in terms of actually asserting that and standing up for it, defending it, fighting for it, a lot of men find that extremely uncomfortable. They don't know how to do it. It's very anxiety inducing. It's a stressful thing. So what happens in that case? We tend to build resentment instead. We wish we could advocate for our boundaries. We let people walk all over us. We don't like it. And then that dissatisfaction ends up building resentment. So we just harbor these passive aggressivity, feelings of ill will towards other people, frustration, doubts about the relationship, ideation around, fuck that guy or she's such a bitch. We don't say it because we're too afraid. But it's in there, it's in the shadow, it's in the subconscious mind, kind of leaking out passively. And maybe one day, boom, you snap. Instead of expressing your boundary in a healthy way, it comes out as a explosion. Fuck you, you always do this, why do you do, and all of that unprocessed resentment and the anger that has been so delayed because it hasn't been given an outlet explodes out in this vomit of unprocessed, unfiltered shit that you bottled up because you couldn't express it in a healthy way. Nobody taught you how to do that. When men are disconnected from their feelings, they're also cut off from their shame, cut off from feeling guilt. And what happens when we're cut off from those emotions? Well, we struggle to change our behavior. If you're disconnected from shame and guilt, you're not going to feel the need to change because you're disconnected from the feelings that tell you to change. The reason shame is such a powerful driver of behavioral change is because it's so fucking uncomfortable. Sit in your shame for half an hour or a day or a week, and it is extremely heavy. There's something wrong with me. I'm a bad person. I fucked up. I've failed. I've embarrassed myself. That changes our behavior because it's so self-depreciating. We hung our head in shame. It's horrible. So we need to be able to feel that, because if we're growth-oriented individuals and we actually want to, evolve and self-actualize and reach our full potential, we need to be able to change, which means we need to be able to learn our lessons. And it's often the most painful lessons that teach us the most, right? And in order to extract the most value from your painful lessons, you got to feel that shit. You got to feel it and metabolize it and process it. So when we're disconnected from what our feelings are, we're also disconnected from our needs. When you're disconnected from feeling, you actually, it's difficult to actually understand what it is you're needing in that moment. It's not so clear, not so obvious. And if you're disconnected from your feelings and your needs, then your boundaries with others are not going to be very well attuned. Because if you struggle to feel what's happening inside of you, you're going to struggle to really understand and empathize with what's happening inside other people. And you'll especially struggle to empathize and understand what's happening inside of a feminine being who is much more connected to her emotions, is driven by those emotions, expresses herself emotionally. You will inadvertently overstep and disrespect her boundaries, triggering her, upsetting her, making her feel unsafe. And you'll be scratching your head trying to understand why and just not getting it. There's been so many times in my life where I triggered my partner and just couldn't understand, couldn't get it. I don't get it. What's she upset about? Why is this such a problem for her? Doesn't make sense. Because I was so disconnected from myself. Of course, I didn't even understand me, let alone what the fuck was happening with her. That's ignorance. And the price is high because we suffer, we suffer when we don't understand. So hopefully you can start to see why this is so important. This is really navigating the complexity of how you actually enter into relationships with other people. How can we do that skillfully? How can we do it with finesse? How can we master and become masterful in our ability to relate? Now, perhaps you see yourself in some of the examples that I've given, some of the ways that I've described this issue and some of the problems that we can have with expressing our boundaries or even knowing what the fuck it is we want, need, feel. So let me now explain a simple formula so you can start to practice and build better boundaries. Now, I want to mention before I dive into this is that this shit requires practice. It's like reps. You need reps in the gym to get strong. We need reps with our boundaries too. It's often an edge. It's by its very nature, it's often edgy because it involves conflict. It involves negotiating with people in high stakes relationships, negotiating the way that we do things. And inadvertently we enter, our boundaries might trigger someone else's boundaries, and then our unmet needs are triggering their unmet needs. And then all of a sudden we're fighting about it. And often we're fighting about it unconsciously because we don't have the language. We don't have the word to reach for. We don't know what need the feeling is connected to. So it's difficult to actually articulate what it is the fuck that we want. This is why it's all so connected. Can you see? This is why I always talk about like mastering the self in terms of understanding what you feel, what you need, where your boundaries are, what your standards are, what your values are. We want to become intimately familiar with all of the architecture of the self. And that helps us to navigate and orient ourselves so much more effectively as we move out into the world, as we form relationships with other people. And it's even harder than that because we arrive at this understanding not from the beginning of our life, but we're already enmeshed in a bunch of relationships. You've got family, you've got friendship circles, you've got social circles, you've got work colleagues. We're already sort of embedded within a social fabric, a lattice work of relationships that we've never been taught how to really become masterful with. And now we have to fill in the missing bits of information and skills that we never got given in school so that we can actually just be functional human beings. So this stuff requires practice. And don't worry, you'll have plenty of opportunities to practice because you'll be doing relationships for the rest of your life. It can be really powerful to do role play as well. That's something I do inside my men's community. Very often we role play different scenarios and situations. How would you handle this? How would you handle that? Putting ourselves in uncomfortable positions where we have to figure out what to express, how to express it, and how to do it skillfully. Those reps are just really, really powerful, really invaluable. So let's get into the formula. Here's a 4-part system for building better boundaries in your relationships. Step 1 is identify what the fuck you feel. For this, I strongly recommend using the emotional wheel. You can just Google emotional wheel. It's a chart of the spectrum of emotions so that you actually have a word and a label to reach for when you're trying to describe why something is important to you. What is happening inside your experience? I know it sounds silly and so fundamental and crude, like we're going back to ABC, the alphabet, or doing our 1 + 1 = 2. But this is how important it is. They should have taught us this in school. In fact, it would have been more useful to you than learning math, probably. We need to improve our emotional vocabulary and upgrade our emotional intelligence. And staring at the emotional wheel and finding, just using that chart to put your finger on exactly what it is that you're experiencing right now is so powerful because it just gives you the right word to express what's happening. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is identify the need that is connected to whatever it is that you're feeling. So our feelings are always connected to needs, as we've talked about. And it's really, really powerful if we can express the feeling and the need. So I feel angry, just to make it extremely simple, I feel angry, and that's because my boundary has been crossed. I'm triggered because you have done something that has overstepped a boundary of mine. So if we bring it back to my original example, I'm angry at you, bro, because you said you were going to be here and meet me at 3 o'clock and you're half an hour late. So there's the feeling, there's a little bit of context, and what I'm needing from you is for you to respect my time. It's really important to me so that I can trust you because I want to respect you. Maybe it's, hey, I feel ashamed. I'm feeling ashamed right now, and that's because I fucked up. I fucked something up. And that's not how I need to be. I need to be better than that. I need to have integrity. Maybe I lied about something. So I feel ashamed because I told a lie and I got exposed in that lie. And my need is to be in integrity with myself. That's why I feel shame, because I'm out of integrity. And integrity is a core need of mine. Maybe you feel grief. Someone that you love has just died. You've had to let go. And that's the need, The feeling is grief. But what does grief fulfill? Grief fulfills the process of letting go. We grieve the thing that we've lost, and that allows us to gradually detach. Step number 3. So yeah, just always remember that the feelings are connected to your needs. So there will always be a need, and it's really important to build that relationship and understand that connection between what you're feeling and what you're needing. So fundamental. Because all of your life is about getting your needs met. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is just like, the whole thing is just a pyramid of human survival. That's what most humans do for their entire life. They're trying to survive, trying to get their needs met. And there's a whole spectrum of what those needs are, and they get more and more sophisticated and nuanced. But it's all just meeting needs. If you can meet all of your needs, you're going to be a stoked, happy, vibrant, healthy human being with an amazing life. If your needs are not met, then you're going to be miserable. And you're not going to live very long. So step number 3 is to express number 1 and number 2. So I feel upset and angry because you burst into my room without knocking. I need you to respect my privacy, my space, as the example. You're going to have to practice creating that combination in different ways. Whatever unique ways that you find in your life. So that's step 3. And step 4 is making a request or invitation, inviting the other person into the process of boundary refinement. Because it's not just, you're not a dictator. If we want to be relational and function as a healthy human being in relationships, we can't just impose boundaries and just demand that other people obey, So the way that we can, sometimes that is necessary. Sometimes we need to have a hard fucking boundary with someone who is just disrespecting your time or whatever it is, just making you feel unsafe. If someone is really unsafe to be around, you need a hard boundary and say, hey, dude, I'm not tolerating this behavior. This either needs to change, or I'm not investing time in this relationship anymore. I'm not going to spend time, I'm not going to invite you over to my house if you get drunk, wasted drunk every time you come over here. Not cool. That's a harder boundary. But if we want to be relational, we want to invite that person into the process with us. We want to negotiate it. We want, ultimately we want them to agree to whatever it is that we're requesting. So you might say, hey, I can see that this, drinking alcohol is something that you enjoy, and I don't want to stop you doing whatever it is that makes you happy. I don't have a problem with you having a few drinks. I can see that you might want to drink because you've had a really hard time at work and you've just got a lot of stress going on, or your girlfriend's just dumped you. So of course you want to do that. And at the same time, when you get wasted, it makes me feel really uncomfortable, bro. I find it hard to be around you when you're like that. So how might we spend time together? And this is where I'm inviting him in. How might we spend time together where you get to have some drinks and I also get to feel safe and comfortable in my own home? What might that look like? I'm inviting them in. Or, babe, I know you're excited to see me and you have something you're excited about that you want to share with me, But when you burst into my room, it disrupts my creative flow and takes me out of the work that I was doing, and that my work is really important and I need you to respect my space. Would you knock? Could you knock or send me a message first? How could we do this? How can we find a way to, you get to share and I also get to feel that my personal space is respected, whatever it is. So we want to frame the boundary as an invitation to collaborate in the process of making the relationship better. The best boundaries, if we want to maintain relationality, are collaborative. It's not me versus you, it's me and you. So we want to invite that opportunity for co-creation in the boundary agreement so that we both agree. And that's going to improve the chances that those boundaries are actually upheld and respected by both parties. And so the key takeaway there is to understand that boundaries, they're not just for you. Boundaries also help other people understand how to be in relationship with us. I'm actually grateful when someone articulates a boundary for me because it helps me to understand how I can better be in relationship with them. If I'm late and my brother says, "Hey man, just letting you know, when you're late, I end up respecting you less because I want to trust you that you're there on time. It would really mean a lot to me if you can be where you say you're going to be at the time you're going to be, or give me a heads up and tell me you're going to be late." I'm grateful for that because it's an opportunity for me to improve how I show up and also respect him. So see this as an opportunity. Boundaries are an opportunity to deepen intimacy, to deepen trust, to just deepen a relationship in general because you understand each other better, you understand edges. And that's part of, about what does a boundary do? It lets us have certainty. When we see a boundary with something, like if I walk out onto the deck, I see that there's a boundary where the end of the deck ends. If I go over that boundary, I'm going to fall off. I'm going to hurt myself. So I like that there's a boundary out there and it doesn't just, there's a railing. It doesn't just walk, end in open air with a 20-foot drop. It gives me certainty when I'm out there because I know where the edges are. And boundaries in relationship are the same. It gives me certainty and I can trust where the edges of our relationship are because they're clearly defined. And that's why I think it is powerful to actually start to articulate and express your boundaries more, because it's going to improve the quality of your relationships. So let's talk about now what happens when boundaries are tested or disrespected. This is extremely common. I recently had to set a boundary, a hard boundary, with a former friend of mine who wasn't meeting my standards for relationship and friendship. When I imposed the boundary, it was tested and disrespected several times. Even though I articulated my boundary, I did that in the best way I could. And I'm not new to this. I've been practicing for a while. I really tried to make it clear. But it's often not that simple. And this is something that I hear from many people that I work with, many of the guys in coaching. They say it's not that simple. I set a boundary and that person didn't listen. The boundary got tested. The boundary got challenged. And in this situation, my boundary was challenged repeatedly, which First of all, reinforce the choice that I made in the beginning, which is I need to have a boundary here because this isn't okay for me. So I was validated in the fact that I needed to have a boundary because the boundary wasn't respected. So what happened then? I had to escalate the boundary because in the beginning it was an invitation. And I had to upgrade that boundary to a wall and cut contact because this person refused to respect the request that I had. So this situation taught me that healthy boundaries come from, first of all, knowing who you are, knowing what you feel and what you need, communicating clearly, inviting the other person into the process. And if that fails, if that person doesn't meet your requests and they don't maintain a certain relationality, as I call it, then we need to be willing to upgrade our boundaries and, if needed, to be able to cut people out of our life if they don't meet the standards that you hold for yourself and your relationships. And so often a boundary will be tested. We'll put the boundary in place. It will be expect it to be tested. Some of that is forgivable. A person needs to learn. Maybe they don't get it right on the first time. Maybe if they take responsibility for that, that's okay. But if there's a disregard for the boundaries that you set and that's repeated, then there needs to be consequences. Boundaries are piss weak if there's no consequences. You have to be willing to impose a certain consequence so that your boundaries actually have a force behind them. They have to matter. It can't just be, don't do that, I don't like it. It's no, if you continue to do that, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to talk to you. We're going to have a break in contact. I'm not going to spend so much time with you. You're not allowed around to my house. Maybe there will be more space. I'm not going to give you so much of my time. I'm not going to give you so much energy. I'm not going to be so available. Maybe if it's with your kids, for example, or with people that you live with, then it has to be something else. It means maybe there's a disciplinary action, some sort of consequence, some sort of punishment, taking away something that they like, time out, whatever it is, there needs to be some sort of thing to back up the boundary so that people learn, hey, I can't just do it. I actually have to take him seriously. And as a general, as a wrap up on that little story, the older I become, what I've started to understand is the older I become, the more mature I become, the less tolerance I have for unconscious or toxic people in my field. Because I get clearer and clearer and clearer about my values, what it is that I stand for, what it is that I'll tolerate, and I start standing up for myself more. I just don't tolerate low consciousness bullshit. And I'm much more willing to cut people out of my life if they don't meet the standards that I hold for myself. And that's a choice. That's just an empowering choice because I don't want to waste my time. I work too hard to protect my energy and focus on the things that are most important to me. So I don't tolerate toxic behavior or toxic people or people that are just unconscious or unwilling to accept responsibility for their behavior. It's a hard no. Especially in my inner circle. In the broader circle of social connections that I have, I'm much more forgiving. I don't have that many expectations. But when it comes to my inner circle, my tight-knit group of people that I trust, there's a hard fucking line. And I do that for a reason, and I know why I do it, and I trust that I'm doing it for the right reason. And I expect the people that I care about to do the same. I want them to hold me to their standards because that's healthy. And I'll have a whole separate episode on standards and values. These are two other elements that I think are really, really crucial and important to drill into. I mean, standards has a bunch of overlap with boundaries, but we'll dive into that and dissect that coming up soon. So, towards the end here, I really want to encourage you to question and audit your life. Where are my boundaries weak? Where are my boundaries too rigid? Where are my boundaries being tested that I'm not advocating for? What feelings, needs, or standards am I ignoring, and what is the impact of that? Maybe that's why you feel resentment. Maybe that's why you're anxious all the time. Maybe that's why there's so much frustration or conflict. Then ask yourself, how do I want to be treated? How do I need to be treated by the people that are close to me? How do I want to treat other people? Who do I need to communicate these things to in order to improve the quality of my life? Journal that. Sit with these questions, write them down for half an hour and contemplate this shit. And I guarantee you will have, by the end of that 30 minutes, a bunch of opportunities to improve your relationships. And then you're going to have to do the work and go out and run the test, get some reps and experiment. But, practice makes the master. So I hope you found this interesting. There's so much more I could have done a 10-part series on boundaries, but I'll leave you with this for now. I think it's enough to get most men started. If you want to dive deeper into this and you really feel that this is an area that you need to work on in romantic relationships, in your self-development as a being, you might like to come and join the men's group that I run. Every week we do group coaching calls and men's circles where we sit down, we role play this stuff, we talk about it, we strategize on how to do it and apply that in our relationships, and it's epic. Really powerful to do that work with a bunch of men who hold you to a certain standard and role model what that looks like. If you want to do this work privately and work with me one-on-one, I have space for coaching clients at the moment. I had a bunch of guys jump in recently, but I could probably fit a couple more. So if that's you want to reach out, you'll find the link to book in a call with me in the show notes. And we can jump on and have a chat about what's happening with you and how we can strategize your growth and development forwards from this point. That's really powerful for the men that want to do that and have the capacity to invest in coaching. Lastly, if you really enjoyed this episode and got something from it, please leave a review for the podcast, drop a comment, let me know what you took from this. Why was it valuable? What did you learn? Lastly, at the beginning, I mentioned that boundaries go way beyond relationships and into spirituality. So I want to touch on that here at the end, because on this podcast, everything we do is foundational building blocks that are constructing we're constructing the pyramid of our life, the process of self-actualization, and everything is directed upwards. That's why I always, at the end of my episodes, I talk about the meta, the big picture perspective, and how this ties into the deeper work that we're doing. I talk about relationships. I talk about foundational stuff like how to get your life in order, self-help, strategic advice to fix certain problems in your life. We're doing that because we're building something. We're not just talking about this stuff randomly. It serves a very specific Purpose. So what are we doing with boundaries? What's the purpose? We're developing the self. We're literally constructing and honing and sharpening the ingredients that make up you. And by doing this, by getting more connected to our feelings and what we need and how that impacts our relationships, what we're doing is we're moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're creating that solid base and foundations for our life. So we're getting solid in the physiological needs. Food, water, shelter, diet, security, resources. We're meeting our needs of safety, connection, making sure our nervous system is regulated. Energetically, we're resourced, we're healthy. That sets us up to have healthy relationships and meet our needs for love and belonging. Healthy relationships are such an important pillar of our life, so we're spending quite a lot of time focusing on getting that shit sorted because most of us don't have that shit sorted. We're building a sense of self-esteem. We're building our self-respect. We're building confidence by doing all of this. All of these needs feed into one another. If you're getting good food, water, shelter, and sleep, you're exercising, you're feeling strong in your body, you're healthy, you feel secure, your nervous system is regulated, your relationships are healthy and vibrant, they're inspiring you to grow, they're challenging you. Of course, you're going to have good self-esteem because life is going well. I respect myself because I work on myself. This is, we're starting to author who we're becoming. We start to discover our unique purpose in life. We're crafting meaning. We're contributing something back to society in a meaningful way that makes us feel like a unique individual who brings value to the world. So we're meeting that need. And as we reach towards the top of the pyramid, we're moving towards self-actualization, becoming all that we can be in this life. And that sets us up, once we've fully architected and built the self, that sets us up for the deepest work possible. Transcending the self. So the more that we develop ourselves, and here's how that connects to boundaries, the more relaxed our boundaries become because we know ourselves more deeply. When we get towards the top of the pyramid, we had to do a lot of boundary building. There was a lot of construction process. And as we do that, the quality of our life improves dramatically as we meet higher and higher needs. But as we move towards the higher stage, the stage of self-transcendence, the spiritual stage, meeting our spiritual needs, our being needs, we could say, as we move towards that stage, we actually start to deconstruct the self. The very self that we've spent our entire lives developing. So boundaries at the higher stage or in certain states of consciousness begin to dissolve altogether. Why? Because when we have a state of non-duality, for example, when we expand our consciousness and our mind becomes infinite, then our boundaries dissolve. Non-duality is in fact, non-dual, so not two, which means, in other words, we become one. which is what all spirituality is pointing to, the state of oneness, the dissolution of all boundaries. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because first we work very, very hard to architect and distinguish the self from others. That's what it means to self-actualize. That's what it means to develop the self. Who am I uniquely as me? And then we realize that others were always a part of the self. If we dissolve all boundaries, the other becomes me. There's no separation between me and you. It's all the self. It's all part of the one. It's kind of a mind fuck, right? I mean, it's the biggest possible mind fuck. So ultimately, all boundaries are imagined distinctions that the mind makes up, or capital M, mind, the infinite mind, makes up in order to experience duality. And that is, you can hear those words and you can understand it conceptually, which is already a step above what most people will grasp in their life. Even to just understand and grasp that is a big step. But to experience that with your consciousness, to actually go through the process of the dissolution of all your boundaries and the self, the finite self, dissolving the ego and becoming the infinite mind, that is life-changing. That will be the most profound experience of your entire life. And while that is absolutely true, it's also important on the path that we don't spiritually bypass the needs and the lower stages. This is a huge trap. We don't just want to, and this is why I talk about spiritual bypassing, because we don't just want to transcend the self. And we don't want to transcend the self before we finish building the self. I mean, we need to construct our self-identity and become a fully integrated version of ourself in this life. That's a very powerful goal that we could have. That sets us up to squeeze the most juice out of life. We don't just want to abandon all of our humanness in order to transcend and be infinite. I mean, you can do that. It's a choice. But what I'm trying to teach you here on this podcast and with my work is, how do we have it all? I want to have the best possible life. I want to experience all there is to experience. I want to be all I can be. And I want to go all the way. That's why I'm spending so much time helping you set up foundations so that when you have your transcendent awakening and discover the infinite mind, that you come back to a life that has the capacity to integrate that experience. That's very important. Otherwise, we'll have the experience, we'll have an awakening, and then we come back to a life that is in shambles, with no money, with dysfunctional relationships, with no direction, and no way to actually translate that insight into value that we can give back to the world, because we didn't have the foundations built. So that's what we're doing here. We're building the pyramid the right way, one level at a time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Good luck in your practice with boundaries. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in the next one.